What's up, Vikings fans? Welcome back to another edition of Vikings Spin. I'm your host, Jason, and we're coming back to you today with some draft strategy here for the Vikings. Something I talked a little bit about on Twitter, and it's my opinion, my very strong opinion here, that the Vikings are going to need 2 second-round draft picks, and I'm really hoping that they get them. And we're going to discuss some ways that they can make sure that they have 2 second-round picks, and also we're going to discuss the areas of need that the Vikings need to fill, and they're going to do that with a combination of re-signings, free agency, and the draft, maybe some trades in there as well. But definitely, and when I say trades, I mean it could be for a player, it could be for just trading draft picks. So basically, the way I see it, the Vikings' primary needs, you can go through them. You could definitely say that they're going to need 2 interior offensive lineman starters. Obviously, the starting guards last year absolutely didn't cut it, so they're definitely going to need to upgrade there. You could also make the case that they are going to need another tackle for depth. Currently, behind Riley Reif and Brian O'Neill, Rashad Hill is a restricted free agent right now. He could be an option to bring back on an RFA deal, but is he the long-term answer depth-wise? And do you view him as somebody that could potentially take over if Riley Reif were to become a cap casualty down the road? I don't think that he's probably necessarily that guy. He may get you through this year, but you got to look at down the line as well. Wide receiver 3 is definitely a clear-cut need. You can, address that in the draft or free agency. You could say now with Sheldon Richardson being an unrestricted free agent that the 3 technique D-tackle, the under tackle, so you're going to need a starter there. So we're up to 5 positions now. A 6th position, Anthony Barr is an unrestricted free agent. We're going to need to fill that linebacker spot with a starter. So that's basically now 4 starters already between the 2 interior offensive linemen and the defensive tackle and linebacker, plus a quasi-starter in wide receiver 3. So you could say 5 there. You're going to need a kicker and a punter because you have 2 free agents right now. And Dan Bailey is an unrestricted free agent. Matt Wiley, the current punter, is a restricted free agent. Those 2 spots are going to need to be filled. And you can also make the argument that you're going to need a tight end, either a starting tight end if the Vikings part ways with Kyle Rudolph, or if they keep Rudolph on a restructured contract, they're still going to need a second tight end with more speed to stretch the field, and maybe somebody that could eventually take over for Rudolph in the future. Additionally, you're going to need some interior offensive line depth, some interior defensive tackle depth. You need to also fill the fullback spot and the starting safety spot. Now, some of these things can be done through just simple re-signing of the Vikings' current players. Like, you can get some cheap depth right now by re-signing Nick Easton on the interior offensive line. He might even be able to compete for a starting spot. Pat Elflein had a down year. Maybe Elflein comes back healthier this season. He was definitely battling through injuries all year. Really affected his performance as he played very poorly, which was disappointing after a really promising rookie year for him. But Nick Easton could come in for cheap and compete, since he's also coming off of an injury. He's been on IR the past 2 years, so he should definitely be willing to sign a really cheap deal. So you can get some depth back there. Aviante Collins is coming back from injury. He was being looked at as a guard potentially for the Vikings, so he could be interior depth. And they also have Cornelius Edison, who signed a future reserve deal that's on the practice squad. He looks like somebody that might be able to make the 53 this year as a depth player. You can also bring back Tom Johnson, Thunder Bucket, on a pretty inexpensive deal. He could be a reserve as a defensive tackle. He excels in that role. C.J. Ham should be easy to get back for the fullback spot on an exclusive rights free agent deal. I can get him back for a year with only having to pay him $645K. Anthony Harris is a restricted free agent. You can get him back by slapping the second round tender on him. That'll give him back in the building for $3.1 million, which is pretty inexpensive. It's going to be cheaper than Andrews and Dejo, who I think is going to be a cap casualty. I don't see the Vikings paying him $5.5 million. So you're going to clear up some cap space there. I'm also of the opinion they should probably extend the contract of Anthony Harris beyond 2019, as he's an ascending player. But those spots, nonetheless, they're going to be filled by some pretty inexpensive re-signings there. Now you can look at the the rest of the positions. You can even look at bringing back Aldrick Robinson as well as a re-signing, maybe not as the wide receiver 3, but definitely as the wide receiver 4. He'd be some cheap depth to bring back, so we'll add Aldrick Robinson in the mix there as a re-signing. But you're still going to look to get another wide receiver in there as well. So that's going to be done either by the draft or free agency. So looking at what having an additional second round pick can do, we'll go over 3 different scenarios. So how do you get that second round pick? That extra second round pick? Because right now we have a first, a second, and a third. Now, one option which is unpopular, and I don't prefer this option, but it's still an option, is by trading Trey Waynes. But I really don't like that because I'd like to bring Trey Waynes back. I'd actually like to re-sign Trey Waynes long term because we really don't know how Mike Hughes' recovery is going just yet. And with Xavier Rhodes is aging as well, so it'd be nice to have Waynes in the fold for the long term. So let's rule out trading Trey Waynes. So how else do we get a second round pick without trading a player? Well, we could look at, in the draft, we have the 18th overall pick in the first round. Now, if you were looking at the draft trade value chart, you could trade your first round pick, number 1 overall, at 18, and package your 4th round pick, number 18, in the 4th round. If you were to trade those to the Chargers, then they would give you back their first round pick, number 28, and the second round pick, number 28. So now, after that deal is done, you've got a first round pick at number 28. You've got a second round pick, 18 overall, a second round pick, 28 overall in the second round, plus your third round pick. So now you got 4 premium picks to try to get yourself some starters. Now you can go, let's say in free agency the Vikings did not draft a linebacker in free agency. They did not obtain a wide receiver in free agency. And let's say they didn't get a defensive tackle in free agency either. And they just signed, say, 1 offensive lineman starter. You could get a linebacker. Let's say in round 1 you go linebacker. In round 2 you go interior offensive line. And in round 2 you also go for a defensive tackle. And in round 3 you can go with a wide receiver or an offensive tackle. Maybe that's maybe you do a little bit more in free agency. There, if you sign just an offensive lineman, maybe you also sign a wide receiver, and then you could use that 3rd round pick on a depth offensive tackle. Here's another scenario here is, let's say the Vikings signed a wide receiver in free agency and they signed a defensive tackle in free agency. You know, whether that's re-signing Sheldon Richardson or signing Gerald McCoy if he gets released, or picking up somebody like Darius Fallone or Rodney Gunter, who are a little bit cheaper defensive tackle options in free agency. Probably get them for about $5 or $6 million a year. Let's say you did that. You got your wide receiver and you got your defensive tackle in free agency. Now, with your top 4 picks, which are between rounds 1 and 3, you, any way you want, you go linebacker, offensive line interior, offensive line interior, offensive line tackle. Another option here, let's say things get a little bit more mixed up. Let's say that Kyle Rudolph gets cut. Let's say you can't restructure, you don't restructure him and you just cut him. Well, you do that same trade. Let's say you go linebacker, tight end, offensive line interior, offensive line depth tackle. So that would mean that you signed at least one offensive lineman interior in free agency, and you signed a defensive tackle in free agency. And then you went to the draft for a linebacker, tight end, offensive line interior, offensive line depth tackle. So in these scenarios, you're tackling basically all of your needs, because, you know, then the rest of the, you know, on special teams, you know, you can either bring Bailey back or try to get somebody else like Gostkowski, for example, or, you know, and with the punter, you can either bring Wiley back, or, you know, you can go try to get somebody maybe like Donnie Jones. You know, so those are, you know, special teams guys are not really going to break the bank. Even the good ones you can get. Probably get Gostkowski if you really want to go for the premium kicker. Probably get him for $4 million a year. You know, a punter like Jones, maybe get him for $1.5 million. You know, if you want to stay on a cheap with punter and just, you know, hand Matt Wiley the, you know, exclusive rights free agent tender for, I think, $570K, that's fine too. But, you know, there's ways that you can address these needs. Now also you can do something else here in the third round. Let's say you trade down in the third. Here's another hypothetical trade. Let's say you trade the third, number 17, and you package that with a 2020 7th round pick, and you trade that to Indianapolis for third round number 25 and fourth round number 26. So, you know, you trade down. Maybe now you can pick up an extra player. Maybe you like a running back, you know, in the fourth round, or, you know, let's say it's one of those scenarios where you kept Rudy on a restructured deal. You grabbed, you know, you went linebacker, O-line, D-tackle, wide receiver in rounds 1 through 3 with those 4 picks. Now you got that extra 4th round pick, and you go get a tight end to be the tight end 2. You know, maybe you get your speed tight end there. He's not started from day 1, but you can still get a speed tight end, you know, a move tight end type of guy in the 4th round. There's a lot of depth in the tight end class this year. So that's basically why I'm making a case for getting an additional 2nd round pick. You know, trading down a couple of times in this draft for the positions the Vikings are targeting and where the depth is in this draft class. I think these moves would be probably the most beneficial. And you don't even, and you know, at that point you don't have to trade a player. You know, maybe you just restructure Everson Griffin. You don't have to trade him. Your defensive end rotation is still really good with Weatherly, Hunter, and Griffin. And you know, you don't have to trade away one of Zimmer's precious cornerbacks. So you keep the cornerback room intact with Rhodes, Waynes, Mike Hughes, Mac Alexander, and Holton Hill all still in the building. So, you know, now your defense won't have to take a step back to improve the offense. You can just improve the offense by manufacturing more picks in the draft by trading down, and supplementing that in free agency. Um, and we'll talk more about free agency and some of the things that can be done with clearing cap space and how to attack free agency in the most beneficial ways. That'll be another podcast, but I definitely thank you guys for joining me here to talk about draft strategy. Don't forget to give us a like on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel here with Viking Spin. We're going to be putting out a ton more content here with the off season, with the combine coming up and free agency. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time.